Everybody has wounds. They're going to come up, especially the deeper that you go. It's not a reason to write someone off.
There are issues here that we're not actually talking about. These are my values. This is what I'm looking for. And if that's not for you, that's okay.
Conflict is inevitable, but healthy repair is not. And how you repair is way more important than just having conflict. And I will say there is a rules for thee, but not for me mentality when it comes to conflict resolution between men and women. Because we all have vulnerabilities. We all have fears. All of us. If anyone says they don't, they're lying.
If you don't want the problem to exist, stop engaging in the problem. It cannot survive if it doesn't have source. Monogamy and having loyalty and commitment and honor are things that have completely been lost in the modern world. And I think the deepest levels of peace and fulfillment come from that. Ka-chow.
Welcome to the Counterpoint podcast, y'all.
What's
Today, we're going to talk about, we're going to take questions from from Kait's YouTube audience. You want to describe what your audience is on YouTube?
So I guess I should probably state what my mission is on YouTube, because I don't really get to select my audience. However, when I look at things that I'm interested in, it is in the domain of relationships and the modern world and how we're navigating relationships. And right, wrong, or indifferent, some of the things that have come as a consequence to some of the things that we've moved through as a society. I will state that when we look at evolutionary psychology, women tend to give a voice to the oppressed. And my issue in kind of the narratives, specifically around feminism and culture and all of those things, I'm not saying they're negative, but what I am saying is we will acknowledge oppressed individuals in so much or insofar as they're not male. And I have done a lot of content around relationships, and one thing that I've taken the time to do is really listen to the feedback that I get. And when I started making content on YouTube, I realized that maybe I had not fully considered the experience of modern men. And when I read through my comments and then I started looking into the research around some of the things that they shared with me, it kind of allowed light bulbs to go off in my mind that like there are issues here that we're not actually talking about. And so I polled my audience, I do this regularly, and I asked them, I'm going to sit down and have a conversation with a man. What are topics that you would want a back and forth on? And so when I look at my phone today, I'm only looking to pull their questions or their topics of conversation. I'm not being rude. But I just wanted to clarify that as we get into it, because I am going to read directly from my comment section and then we will discuss them. And we haven't actually had any conversation prior to this about them. So it will be interesting to see how this goes.
Yeah, it's been very interesting to see the responses that you've gotten from men, hear their stories. For me, it's been a lot of like, oh yeah, I know how that feels like. And, being able to empathize with a lot of what men go through as a result of some of the things you described with the societal shifts that we've seen in the U.S. It's been very interesting. So I'm excited to dive into it.
All right, you want to get into it?
Let's do it.
Okay. So let's start with what the Me Too movement, both legit and false accusations, did to male-female interactions and relationships in general.
Very nuanced. And again, disclaimer, I can only speak from my lived experience and what I have observed, as all of us can. So that being said, what I have observed is, at least, especially when we look at powerful men's in position of power, celebrities, etc., an accusation alone can ruin a man's life, regardless if it's true or not. It can absolutely taint his reputation forever, regardless of there being evidence or not. What I have observed is that it's kind of a men are guilty until proven innocent scenario. And with women, it's not so much that. I've seen a fair share of people, whether it's stand-up comedians or otherwise, athletes, who get accused of something. And then it comes out later that the accusation was false. There's not only a slew of people who have judged them based on that accusation and tarnished their reputation forever, but some of them never recover. And I know a lot of like my favorite stand-up comedians were around 2020 were accused of something, and then evidence proved later that that accusation was false. But I still see comments about around that event to this day. It never leaves them. And so, although there's a lot of positive from the Me Too movement in terms of the abused and assaulted and what have you, having a more of a voice and bringing societal attention to those issues, it also had some very negative outcomes where people even 30 years ago, 40 years ago, as we've seen in some cases, start to speak up and say, well, wait a minute, this happened to me. And it's just, then you have statute of limitations that comes in. And it's just, but overall, I've just seen a very, a negative side of it where even an accusation can ruin someone's reputation.
So I very much believe in the concept that men are guilty until proven innocent. And even when they're proven innocent, they're still seen as guilty. Like, in right, wrong, or indifferent, I would say wrong. But men who are accused will lose everything. Like, there are athletes who've been dismissed, they can no longer play, or they're just like, even if they're at the peak of their career, if they come back and continue on a different team, they're never the same. Whereas in if we play it out in the other way, women being accused of assaulting men is almost seen as a joke.
Let's hear her side of the story.
Well, not even that. It's like, yeah, right. Like, you wanted it. Like, there's no way that a man would say no to sex or anything like that. And so just the stigmas around those experiences. But insofar as answering the question, how has this impacted male and female relationships? Men, and this is where you can speak on the male experience more than I can, but based on what I've heard and what I see, men are much more abrasive to approaching women for being creepy or weird or stalkerish or being accused of being, inappropriate with them in some type of way. And the unfortunate thing about that from the female perspective is many women want to be pursued. Women, again, that are tempered similar to me. I can't speak for women who are a little bit more, how would I say this? Blunt, forthcoming, aggressive, promiscuous, maybe. There are women who will approach men in an aggressive manner, for sure. However, many women also who are maybe traditional in values believe in being approached and pursued by men. And so the fact that good men are now stifled in their ability to approach women or pursue them, it creates this wedge. And then again, it's like, is that a double standard? Is it men always supposed to approach women? I think that really depends on the type of woman that you want to pursue. Like, do you want to be pursued as a male? And if you are, then there's a certain type of woman who is going to feel more confident or more willing to approach in that way versus the other way around. So I think when it comes to my perception of the world and what I believe in, I think it's stifled a lot of those experiences that are very positive and can be very positive from happening at all. It's kind of like we threw the baby out with the bathwater, right? There are certainly experiences where men who have power and influence will overstep women's boundaries, right, wrong, or indifferent. And I would say completely wrong, but it does happen. However, to paint a picture with a broad brush to say that every man is a predator and all men are evil or masculinity is toxic, right? We can take many different ideas and push them to an extreme. It's detrimental to the majority of people who want something solid and enjoy the interactions in that way. And I think it's made things a lot more covert in how we communicate, how we approach one another, how we interact. A lot of dating has become very surface level. So I think I see it, yes, the voice to that and acknowledging it happens and giving a voice to women who have been victimized, I think is important. I would like to see men also receive the same level of respect for those experiences by women, because I do and am very well aware that that happens. It's just not as much discussed. And finding the balance without throwing out some of the value-driven men and women who want those experiences without being terrified that their reputation or their livelihoods will be taken away from them because of a false accusation or misinterpretation of what was happening.
So we hit on like the men in power, powerful men who have been, had these allegations through their career, but you also spoke about how it's impacted just the day-to-day relationships between men and women. speaking on that, and I'm gonna hold off on talking about double standards because I'm willing to
We'll
bet
get to
there's
it. Yeah.
I'm willing to bet there's double standards questions in there, and I'm happy to dive into those. But as far as just this whole thing, whether it's Me Too, radical feminism, etc., impacting the day to day people who just want to have a relationship and be able to approach one another without all of these potential implications. You talk about like pop psych and how words have lost meaning,
Mhm.
right? So like words that come to mind who that have been so overused because of pop psych and people self-identifying and diagnosing. Words that come to mind would be like narcissistic, gaslighting, um, even abuse to a certain extent. I believe has lost a lot of meaning, and it's actually taking a voice away from people who are actually experiencing abuse. The other side of that is when we talk specifically about ending relationships, it's my belief that men have to be very careful in those scenarios. And I don't mean to be cliche here, but a woman scorned comes to mind. When we talk specifically about abuse, obviously there's like a very clear line, physical abuse. Obviously, everyone knows what that is. When it comes to things like emotional or verbal abuse, it seems as though if you have two identical scenarios, and let's just say you get a snippet, a screenshotted text or a soundbite, right? And we've seen this recently with a YouTuber and his ex. They went through this, and he had the receipts to show men have to have that in order to have their name cleared. Like you have to have undeniable proof that a woman was abusive in order to clear your name, whereas a woman can just say she was verbally or emotionally abused, and it's law as accepted by society, and mob mentality will support her. If a man makes the same claim, everyone wants to hear her story. Well, I'm sure she was doing it out of survival mode or defense. I'm sure there's some explanation for this. Men don't get that same consideration, and so I don't know what to call that, whether it's like the double standard of abuse or what have you, but I have noticed that it's like women can cry emotional and verbal abuse and it be immediately believed, whereas if men claim the same thing and it happens every day, um, men are first of all less likely to claim it, but also even if they do, they're less likely to be believed.
I think so. I will just extrapolate this into a principle that I see across the board in many different domains of culture. We fight for equality, but truly we want privilege. And so that means we want the same outcomes as men, not just the same opportunity, the same outcomes. This comes down to like payments, right? And how much money men make versus women and like the pay gap that's always discussed but never actually looked at. Right? There's multiple different things. And so it's like we want all of the freedom without any of the responsibility. Right? I want to be able to say what happened to me and I want you to believe it's true because I'm a woman and we are respect and I think this is right. I think that women are much more fragile than men. And this is why I think men go through many, many toxic experiences and don't complain. They don't voice them. They don't complain. They don't make a case of it. They unfortunately, because they are also moved into a place where they can't talk about their feelings, they can't be vulnerable, they can't express what's actually happened to them, or they're seen as weak. Right. And so if a man comes and says, my girlfriend psychologically and emotionally abused me verbally every single day and made my life hell, they say, stop being a bitch. If a woman says that, it's, oh my God, he's so awful. Stay away from him. Do we need to call the police? Do we need to get a lawsuit involved? Like they just get so much more camaraderie. And again, I think some of that has validity. Women are not as strong, respectfully, as men. And I don't know if that's conditioning or expectations or a combination of both. I think some of that is just inherent to the differences between men and women, which we can't even talk about because people get offended saying that we're different, but we are different. And so fundamentally, one, there are double standards, and we will talk about that. Two, the things that men go through that women put them through has been astonishing for me to learn about. Because like we've had these conversations where I'm like, does this actually happen? Like for those of you that don't know, um, Mav and I do live together, but I also will read my comments and I will be just shocked at some of the stories that I receive, whether they're email or comments in my section, and I'll ask him about his lived experience. And unfortunately, a lot of it for him rings true, which is why I wanted to have this conversation with him. But I just have a lot of compassion for men. I know that a lot of men in my audience think that I'm less than integral about the content that I make, which is sad to me. But I also, you know, if I had their frame of reference, I probably would see me in the same way. Just like if a man was coming on and talking to women about certain things, I might have a jaded perspective about that too. So I get it. But is there anything you have on top of that, or do you want me to move to the next one?
No, let's move to the next one. I think it's
Okay.
a good icebreaker there.
How to actually find a good woman who has worked for men. Wait, what has worked for men who have found good women?
This is a great question, and one I had to ask myself, and I had to be very honest about how I was going about trying to find love. And when I was truly honest with myself, and I looked at the ways I was going about portraying myself, what I led with, the things that I was doing to garner attention, it became very clear why I was experiencing less than satisfactory outcomes. You attract what you are, but also you can't complain about the caliber of human you attract if the way you went about attracting them is very processed food like. And what I mean by that is if you've got a shirtless Instagram selfie as your profile picture, right, which I had years ago, first to admit, and you seek attention, validation, or you just lead with that constantly, lead with your body, you're going to attract people who are interested in your body, not who you are, generally. If you lead with money, if you tout your status, if you basically tout anything attached to your ego, you're generally going to attract people who like you for that thing rather than who you are, what your values are, etc. And so that leads to a lot of dissatisfactory relationship dynamics is when you get deep into it and you realize everything you built the relationship on was superficial or surface level or not sustainable long term. And I have experienced that firsthand. I've made many of my own mistakes. I've had to undergo a lot of personal development to understand myself to the point where I knew why those outcomes were happening. And also, if we think about how the dating scene has evolved and changed, it's my opinion that with few exceptions, there are always exceptions to anything that we say, always. However, by and large, you're not going to find Mrs. Right on a dating app. And vice versa. You're not going to find Mr. Right on a dating app, generally. If you are someone who has done the work emotionally, somatically, just personal development, if you're interested in that, those people who have done that work and are, maybe they're highly successful, maybe they're just integrated people, generally you're not going to find them in those settings. You're not going to find them in a bar either. You're generally not going to find them in those types of places. I can say, social media and the internet may make it more likely for you to meet more people. We met on, via social media, via mutual acquaintances. But dating apps are just something that it's, think about what you're swiping. You're swiping based on a Kodak moment. You're swiping based on a very brief resume. And the odds of that being a match truly are very low. But I would also, I don't mean to be woo-woo, but, you attract what you are. Sick attracts sick, and either one heals or it doesn't, the relationship dies, right? One heals and leaves, or they both heal together. Those are the two outcomes there. So how much work have you truly done on yourself? Have you done a honest audit of how you showed up in prior relationships and your own dysfunction, your own wounds? Have you done that type of work? If you have and you continue to, then you will eventually attract somebody of the same vein. But if you're trying to attract someone based on your body, your money, your career, etc., those are good assets as an individual to have. But as far as attracting your forever person who you can spend every single day with and not want to strangle and grow with and have experiences with and laugh with, those things have very little to do with that.
So I agree with you, and I think that that's important. However, a lot of the men in my audience feel invisible. And they're not people that are attracting women, and it's
Yes.
like, okay, so I understand what you're saying. I would definitely say do not lead with assets within you that can be leveraged. I think that's a very important point. However, when it comes to women who are good, the first thing that I want to say is they do exist.
Yes.
There are many women who are strong in their values, in their convictions, and believe in the essence of their femininity. That doesn't mean they're not stubborn, and that doesn't mean they do not have ambition, and that does not mean that they are a doormat to you. However, the things that I would like you to speak about are, how do you know that you have a good woman? And if a man is finally getting attention from a woman, how can he discern this woman is actually good for me versus this feels really good because I've been starved from attention? I think that for them, and I'm speaking for my audience, so I'm apologizing if I'm getting it wrong, but I think that differentiator there and the having the discernment to see that would be an important skill for them to have.
Great question. And I can only speak to my own experience from having a good woman. And also, I'm sure a lot of people will hear me and be like, easy for you to say, pal, you're 6'5" and, all this blonde, blue eyes, whatever the thing is. And I get that. And to an extent, you're right. Like I genetically have some advantages in terms of catching attention in a room full of people. But that being said, again, we come back to what you want long term, which is a partner, which is a best friend, which is somebody that you're intimate with and you can be vulnerable with, because the biggest.
We'll get to vulnerability.
Well, okay. So you want me to wait?
Okay. Well,
I'll make one statement.
Okay.
You are going to have to be vulnerable, and you're going to have to trust the woman that you're with to hold those vulnerabilities, not load them into a quiver and fire them back at you. And I know a lot of men have experienced that. I have experienced that multiple times. And so don't let that create a forever story where you can never be vulnerable. That's not the answer. I'm telling you, from someone who had a very jaded view on marriage and relationships and being vulnerable with women, I could have very well gone down that path of the typical fucking alpha douche coach, alpha man mentality, where it's like, just work on yourself, make money. Don't ever be vulnerable with women because they'll just use it against you. Don't ever just hide your feelings because they'll see that you're weak and they'll find a man who's stronger. I get all those fears. At the same time, in order to have the love and relationship that you want, you're going to have to be able to be vulnerable. Now, here's where it gets interesting, because there's spectrums of vulnerability, right? Now, and we don't want to overcorrect, because humans in general, but I can only speak for men, when we have something that doesn't work out, we tend to overcorrect and be the opposite. At least I have, right? So it's like, oh, if we were vulnerable and it got weaponized, well, I'll never be vulnerable again. That's the answer. It's like, no, there's actually a middle ground there. But the middle ground is called, and a mentor and I really, my work with a really good mentor helped me figure this out and make it much more attainable for me long term. But it's that composure, right? So on the left, we have collapse. That's where your emotions completely control you, and you get super activated and loud and or you just really emotional and not able to communicate effectively, or you get manipulative, abusive, covert contract, etc. Like that's the collapse. The posture is the other side, where it's like, I'm a stone. I feel no emotion. I am completely indifferent, and you cannot break me. Well, that's a great way to be very lonely and never have a connective relationship. The middle is composure. I can be with these emotions. I can be vulnerable. I can say what is. I can say what my truth is moment to moment and be good with that. That's difficult for a lot of people to find, and I typically see a lot of men on one side or the other.
Okay. So we discussed vulnerability. Do you want to touch on discerning whether you have?
Sorry. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So this is tough, because when it comes to like, okay, if you have a good person or not, everybody has wounds. Everybody. There is no perfect woman. There is no perfect man. And when you get deep into a relationship, that shit's going to come up. It's not, you have to be able to discern red flags being abuse, manipulation, covert tactics to get you to bend your boundaries, etc. You have to be able to listen to your body and know when that's taking place, and be able to distinguish that from just a wound that someone has around a certain thing, a vulnerability. Maybe it's a tough conversation you have that ignites that person. And that's not a red flag. Everybody has wounds. They're going to come up, especially the deeper that you go. It's not a reason to write someone off. Be discerning, have boundaries, be respectful above all else. But if you notice consistent patterns in someone's behavior, and you can have a lot of really direct conversations early on, I think, to gauge this, which we did a really good job of. Like, it's like, just get direct about what you want, which means you have to know what you want. Ask them what they want, what their ambitions are, what their worldview is on certain things. If you plan on having a family, ask these questions early. Obviously don't interrogate them the first date, but definitely make a commitment to having those conversations to gauge whether or not your values are aligned. what are your values, which means, again, you have to know what your values are. But what was very, very important for us was knowing that very early on, establishing our non-negotiables, our red lines, and then make vows around that, which is uncommon, I think. But I think that it was really good for us. But if nothing else, we got crystal clear on what we want, what our desired outcome for our relationship, our life, business, etc., and values. Just I think having really direct conversations about it and being able to navigate those conversations, stay in the arena. If you have a disagreement, observe how you handle on both sides that disagreement, observe, respect, and then, observe consistent themes over time. Time tells a lot, but if you have really direct conversations about these very meaningful things, it can help you avoid a lot of long-term dysfunction.
So I would say, and this is like my own opinion, obviously my biases are from my frame of reference and kind of knowing how I am. So I will say things to look out for. One, does she take responsibility? Or is everything always your fault? If it always your fault, this is probably not somebody that you're going to be able to maintain your life with, or you will become a shell of yourself. All right, so does she take responsibility? Does she apologize? If I am wrong, and this happened very early in our relationship, I will immediately, and this is me, again, I'm talking about me because that's all I can talk about, but apologizing for my tone or saying things I don't mean or becoming activated in ways where I should be able to self-regulate. Those are things that I think are very important. The other thing that he kind of alluded to was very early on in our relationship. He can speak on his history, but I was very clear and had a lot of understanding about who I was, what I valued, how I wanted to live my life, and what I needed from a partner. Not what I wanted, what I needed. And so with that, very early on, I said, I have rules. These are my rules. These are my values. This is what I'm looking for. And if that's not for you, that's okay. And so I didn't impose my needs or desires on him, but I also was not going to stifle myself in order to receive his approval. And so having someone who has strong values, I think, is very important, convicted by those values, insofar as when you have a conversation and they say they're going to do something, they do it, right? Something that you said to me last night around like why you love me was because I've always followed through on what I told you I was going to do. Right. And so it's not just saying things that sound good in a moment. It's making sure that you are impeccable with your word and you mean what you say and you follow through with those things without overcommitting. As far as women that I think are very healthy, they do not shut down. I think that women have and should be able to advocate for themselves. My goal in my relationship has always been to feel heard and that my opinion is taken in, but I do not need to make the final decision. I lead that to him. And we had that conversation very early about what are our roles in this relationship? Who's leading this? What is my role and expectation? And where are my responsibilities within the relationship? If somebody views a relationship as what do I get out of this, that is going to be a toxic person. They will be a leech and they will suck you dry. If they look at a relationship as far as what can I give? How can I contribute? How do we build this? And again, your roles in the dynamic will be very different. Our roles are different, but we both contribute equally. They just, again, the roles that we play are different. We're men and women. So in the way that I see it, and again, I will be very transparent that I'm more traditional than I am modern. But so I would say things that you can actually see and feel. And the other thing I'll tell you, based on my experience and my understanding of Mav's experience and his history, is that your body will know. Do not try to justify red flags because you want to be loved. And I know that that is difficult because I can only imagine every single one of you, especially the people I've interacted with, are very, very emotionally intelligent, sophisticated men who are jaded to a certain degree, justifiably so, from my understanding of many of their experiences. And that's heartbreaking. But the women that you see online posting pictures of their body on OnlyFans, Instagram, TikTok, the majority of those women are not going to be women that you want to spend the rest of your life with. And I know it feels like that's the only pool of people that you can find because they're available and you can just open up your phone. And it's hard for you to go out and approach people, kind of like how we've already gotten into this conversation around the Me Too stuff. But just like you would suggest that women don't look for the biggest, loudest, wealthiest, kind of biggest posturing male in the room to be their best partner, I would not look for the woman who's getting the most attention and the most likes and the most comments and is putting out the most stuff or putting out her body publicly in certain ways to be the woman that you try to pursue. will want someone who is probably morally sound, strong in her values, convicted around those things, and values relationships. If you value relationships, you want somebody else who values relationships. If not, then again, I think being transparent about that from jump is very important.
Transparency, which is that's what I was going to hit on next, and I'll just briefly go through this. But one thing, if we talk about things to look for in a potential partner, responsibility, ownership, and then how you repair, right? Or how you apologize, right? So responsibility, accountability, and the apology. Do they, in their apology, do they just say sorry, or do they acknowledge the ways in which they may have hurt you? And the reason why I want to hit on this is because all these things lead to how you repair, because conflict is inevitable, but healthy repair is not. And how you repair is way more important than just having conflict. And I will say, from my experience and many of the men I've heard from on your channel, there is a rules for thee, but not for me mentality when it comes to conflict resolution between men and women. Men are expected generally to empathize, to listen, to repeat back maybe what you just said, to take responsibility, to speak to the ways in which it hurt you, and then apologize and then change behavior. I have not experienced until now that from women generally. I think that it's one of those things that's expected from men as an emotional intelligence development sort of thing, and not so much received by men. And then just going back to like direct questions, we have from jump have been able to address things very directly. And when I say direct, I don't mean like super assertive aggressive, just being transparent about what's going on in your body. The longer you let something stew and boil up inside you, the greater propensity for a later conflict that there is. One thing that's really helped me is acknowledging that sometimes we just create stories based on our history, based on prior relationships, based on our psyche. It just happens. Sometimes you can create a story about what you just witnessed someone do or behavior you just observed. Coming to them with saying, hey, I got a story that you think this, or that you did this because of this. When you do that, you're acknowledging that it's just a story that you have. You're not making an accusation, but observe how they react. If they're defensive, if they're not willing to hear you, if they weaponize it, because this is a vulnerability. You're saying this is really hard for men to do, right? Because we all have vulnerabilities. We all have fears, all of us. If anyone says they don't, they're lying. Your ability to be able to voice those in a healthy manner and have them received, which we just experienced like 3 days ago. It's a perfect example. But it's like we all have stories. Your ability to navigate those stories, voice those stories, be heard, have them held is a great indicator of long-term health. If they get defensive, tell you you're crazy, use it against you to make you feel bad for bringing it up, that might be something you want to look at. And then one last thing I want to hit on is you mentioned that you had a lot of red lines and no shit values from jump. Men need that. Men need very direct, hard lines from women because human nature, what have you, if it's not said from jump, it will later be mentioned as a justification for behavior. It's like, oh, well, you didn't say I couldn't do this, or well, we never talked about this, or you didn't say this was cheating, or you didn't say anything about attention to other people. Being direct about that from jump and making a hard line as a woman is something that men need. They need, I don't want to say rules, but they do need very hard lines set so that, as you have said many times, I'm saying this for myself. Mm-hmm. Right. I think that's so important for men because it's just like you've always said, men are coachable. I agree, but we need clear lines.
The other thing, like insofar as men, right? Because you talked about vulnerability. I, as a woman, am honored yet see the vulnerabilities that I receive to be my responsibility to hold. Right. And with that responsibility means not weaponizing them, regardless of how angry, upset, triggered, whatever justification I could leverage to make that okay. It's never okay. And I expect the same from him. And so like not having double standards across the board as far as like, I can do this to you, but you can't do it to me. It's okay for me to do that, but you're not allowed to do that. I don't like that stuff. And that again is something that I have to hold responsibility for. On the other side of that, when we talked, you said something and I've lost my train of thought. But yeah, rules, guys can tell he's listened to the channel. Rules for thee, but not for me.
Well, I've been saying that prior. But, yeah.
Okay, next question.
I hate rules for thee, not for me.
Yeah. How to ask women to do something for me without being perceived as needy?
Somewhere along the line, you were given a story that you're needy for having a need. And I can empathize that with that 100%. I've been told that before. Again, we want to go back to the composure, the collapse, the posture, right? If you have a need, it is valid. All right, you need to be able to voice that need in a way that's just honest and true to yourself. I mean, we do it every day. We,
Well, and I would say this too, because I've said this, and I think this is something that kind of shifted your perspective. And I don't know all the things that have shifted your perspective to get you where you are now in our relationship versus where you've been. But I genuinely, genuinely believe that my partner's needs are my responsibility. And so with that, there is no judgment around what his needs are. If I am committed to being his partner, then his needs are things that I need to care to. I can be transparent about whether I want to do them or not, or maybe not right now, but I will never invalidate something that he needs from me. And I see that, one, as an honor that he can come to me and express that. I don't take that for granted because I understand much more now how suppressed men's emotions are in their vulnerabilities or willingness to express. So I don't take that for granted. But I think asking for your needs to be met is not anything that you should feel shame around or judgment around or self-critical around, because we all have needs. And if you do not verbalize and own what your needs are, you will find a manipulative way to get them met.
Mhm.
And so it's understanding the trade-off. Either you can own what that is and be transparent about it and communicate it directly, or you can try to stifle it, compartmentalize, and then find a way, like I give to get, for example, in order to meet that need, right? I took her on a really nice date. I bought her a bag, and I was hoping she would sleep with me, and then she didn't. And then you feel like she's an entitled bitch, but you didn't actually state what your needs were or what your expectations were around that experience, instead of giving because you want to give without expectation of something in return. So that's what I would state from my perspective lens. But
Yeah. Don't make covert contracts. And I speak from someone who used to do that. You know, I had to learn how manipulative that can be. For example, it's like you made a great example there, but I think a lot of men fall into this mentality of, oh, well, I paid for this, I did this, I took you on a date, and I bought you this, so you don't get to be mad at me right now over a conflict that's completely unrelated, right? So like any kind of dynamic where you have a thumb on the other person, you need to be very self-aware of. It's a covert contract is when you give something and you expect something in return, but you don't tell the other party that, and that's not fair. It never works. Both people do it, but I think men are more prone to it because of the increased likelihood of men being provisional, and then wanting. I think it comes from an integral place of just wanting appreciation and acknowledgement for the work and provision that we do. But that can never be used as leverage to elicit a behavior from your partner.
And I will tell you, any woman who is convicted in her values and feels confident in who she is will not tolerate that. You do not throw things in people's faces because you have a need that you couldn't communicate getting met, and instead you want to be like, you don't get to do that, or I deserve this from you because I did all those things. Like, don't. That will be the last time.
Yeah.
that ever happens.
And so the needs, just to cap that off there, I don't think there's any such thing as needy. I think there are wounds that can only heal in relationship. I've had many heal in this relationship. I needed the space to courageously voice those needs. You receive them as someone to say, oh, this is just an opportunity for me to love you where you haven't been loved before. And then me view it the same way. It could be something as simple as, hey, I need your affection right now. Hey, I need to lay with you right now. Hey, I need to just have I want you here with me right now. Can we have a good conversation? I want to talk to you. I want your attention. I want your time. Which if you hear that, it's like, oh, my partner wants me. They just want me. They just love me. Great. What a fucking great thing. It's actually a really positive thing if you start to shift your perspective and see it as an opportunity to love your person where they've never been loved. And when you do that, and you put reps in like that, you're giving space for that wound to heal. And I'm a firm believer that we heal in relationship, and those wounds only come up in the thick of a relationship. It's easy to not feel needy when you're single. These things only come up in relationship, and the right person and the right relationship can really be a healing thing.
Okay. Well, let's move into monogamy.
Ooh.
We all live in a world monogamy is the cultural standard, but so many relationships suffer or fall apart because of cheating. I had a few books at Blinkist written by women saying monogamy is an evolutionary construct that came by property after humans stopped being nomads and started to be farmers. But women never have been made to be monogamous. It's an interesting question. Does our society live a lie? Have we created a cultural standard that is unnatural? Are all the swingers, polyamorous, etc., more honest or on the right path? Is jealousy just a cultural thing like disgust?
We could spend a whole podcast on this question. I'm going to speak from what I believe as somebody who had a very low amount of faith in the establishment of marriage and somebody who was very pessimistic in my views on long-term monogamy. I mean, I went through a period where I was like, I don't know. I don't know if monogamy is something that is meant to be. I don't know if humans. I had that same argument. I was like, but men are genetically wired to mate with as many people as possible to, help the help the to for society to advance and for the population to grow, right? And so I could have easily went and justified everything with that story. I will say that I think you could look at the order of society. Like when we look at what causes chaos and what causes order, generally the nuclear family in a healthy marriage contributes to a more orderly society by and large. I think that a lot of just my personal opinion, I think that the more integrated you are and the more that you know what you want, who you are, and what brings you peace, for me, the thing that brought the most peace is a healthy, strong, loyal, respectful, intimate relationship. Get the most amount of peace from that. There's no comparison. And I think that men want peace. And I think peace is found. I think that the right woman can bring you a hell of a lot of peace in your life. The wrong woman, however, can fuck your shit up and make it chaotic as hell. So it goes back to finding, there's somebody for everybody. Obviously, do the inner work, do the personal development, but the right person will bring abundant peace to your life. And so I think that a lot of the polyamory and the swingers and all that stuff, I think it's just a justification to be hedonistic and give in to temptation. I think there's really, I think it's like water through a pasta strainer in terms of your wholeness. Like, do you actually feel whole sleeping with multiple people a night? Do you actually feel whole, not having a partner that you can trust to be loyal? Do you even like yourself? There's a lot of questions I would ask those folks. And I'm not saying, again, this is my personal beliefs. You can say whatever you want. I know there's a lot of people out there who have, live in polygamy and they say they're fine and happy. That's wonderful. It's not something that I believe contributes to a truly peaceful, whole, fulfilling life.
Well, I think it's about what you want to experience, right? Because humans by default are tempted by lots of different things. There's temptation, there's desire, there's novelty, and all of those things you will come to face. I think, and I personally value doing the thing that most people won't do. Most people will not commit to a marriage. Most people will not commit to their person in a time of tumultuous experiences and massive temptation. It is harder to do that because giving into impulses, desires, temptations, and then justifying them based on he did this or she did that or it's been bad or whatever story you want to use to justify that behavior, that's cool if that's how you want to live. I think that monogamy in itself, from an orderly position to a family dynamics position to a societal construct to individual fulfillment, is the best approach for me, in my values and what I think the majority of people crave but don't necessarily believe they can get. And if you don't believe you can get what you want, you'll teach yourself to want what you can get. And that's where a lot of this hedonism, I want to do what feels good. This feels good right now. I'll deal with the consequences later, or I'll just replace it with another stimulation, like whatever that might be. If that brings you fulfillment, which I don't get to say, then sure. However, then we're going to get into the double standard on body count, because this is my issue with men, and I love you, but you cannot say that women are washed up and disgusting who sleep with you or sleep with other men, right? Have a body count of more than one, while simultaneously screwing every opportunity that you have in front of you. You're only creating more women who are like that. And I did a whole video on body counts and double standards and all that stuff, so I won't get deep into the weeds around that. But I think if you don't want the problem to exist, stop engaging in the problem. It cannot survive if it doesn't have a source. Same thing with pornography, the same thing with OnlyFans. Like, you know, women are not on that platform making money because nobody's watching their shit. And the majority of people watching their shit are men. So, again, it's a double-edged sword. I'm not pointing the finger at one party. I have my own values around that stuff. But I do think that monogamy and having loyalty and commitment and honor are things that have completely been lost in the modern world. And I think the deepest levels of peace and fulfillment come from that, because when you have focus on something and you commit to it, it removes every other distraction and every other temptation. It's just no. It's just a no. It's just not happening. Impossibility.
Peace.
But more than that, you're more focused, you're more productive, you're oriented towards things you want. Like, you are making progress in your day to day because you have already eliminated every possible distraction from your life. Right? Whereas when you're constantly on the edge of any temptation in front of you, you're not actually progressing as a person. You're just finding the newest stimulus to evoke some positive emotion or make you feel good in a short-term moment, not actually moving towards anything.
It's like if you don't have restraint, you'll come up with a story to justify not having restraint. I think you have to have restraint in a lot of areas of life, and the outcome of that is peace. It's peaceful because you shrink the pool of decisions for everyone around you. When you are strong in your values, you know who you are, you know what you want, you have one person that you are forever committed to, you've cut off all other alternatives. Life is a lot more simple and life is a lot more peaceful than if you have all these variables you're constantly juggling. Like, you know, as a man, if you've got like 16 different women that you're texting in your phone, all under different names, you forget their name. It's like, how is that peaceful? How are you actually fulfilled at night? Like, if you're juggling which Tinder match you're talking to, or like you're not being faithful to your person. And I speak this because I've lived it. So I don't want to be a hypocrite here. I've lived it, and I know the contrast from one to the other. And I can tell you that shit will never lead to peace or fulfillment or wholeness. You'll never feel good about yourself. You'll never actually be alive. You'll just exist. Whereas the richness and the depth of a monogamous, long-term, loyal, communicative, intimate relationship is the most peace you'll ever experience.
So I'm glad that you brought that up, because I think a lot of men, and again, this is my assumption and I could be completely wrong, but I think a lot of men look up to and idolize the dominant male who attracts all the women, right? The top 20% of men. And they think that that is the life. Like, if I could get men who are starved from attention, the contrast of getting attention whenever you want it feels like a dream, I think, for many of them. Crave that. And then you've basically just said that's not it either.
Processed food.
So, like, what would you say to men who think that that's what they want?
I always make that analogy. Like, it's the attention and the notoriety and the external validation. It's all feel good in the moment type of shit, but you are not sustained long term. It's just like grabbing candy corn that's on top of your desk instead of opting for something that's nutrient dense, like chicken and baked potato or some shit with broccoli, right? Like, that's going to sustain you for longer. It's going to be better for your body compared to constantly grabbing the candy corn. And we can narrow this down even to as far as like your daily behavior, how much screen time you have, what are you engaging in? Is it adding to your life? Is it actually fulfilling you? I just think that people aren't really honest with themselves in terms of what is making them feel whole, making them feel integral, liking what they see in the mirror. It's the people that have the loudest voices aren't necessarily the exemplars, you all. Like, if you, just because, and like, there's positives and negatives to Andrew Tate, but just because he has the loudest voice doesn't mean you should listen to him. And anybody else who just speaks very loudly on things or says this is one red flag for anybody in that alpha male space is like, if they're trying to give you a blueprint for how to behave, right? Like, oh, do this to elicit this behavior from women. Don't do this. Basically, like, and a lot of men look for that. Like, how should I behave in order to be like that or get the woman? What's steps 1 through 5? And life has no blueprint. It's just, are you integrated or not?
Well, and here's the crux of that too. Like, if indeed you act that way and a woman falls in love with you, they don't love you.
Mm-hmm.
They love who you've portrayed yourself to be. And I think that that is empty. So moving on. Last question that we'll answer today. And if you guys enjoy this, let me know, because we're happy to do a part 2. There's like 70 questions here, and I think we've gotten through like 5. Why women think that they shouldn't have to work at the relationship?
Ooh. Would you like to speak on behalf of women?
Sure. Okay. This kind of relates to what I said earlier. I think most women, unfortunately, like I said, they want freedom without responsibility, and that leads to entitlement. And men take all the responsibility with limited levels of freedom, and I would say that's pretty akin to slavery. And so when we think about relationships that are fruitful and healthy, you want a partner who values the responsibility of pouring into the relationship. If you are with somebody who's always looking at what they can get from you, what you're doing for them, what they need from you, what they want, how incompetent you are as a partner, a real man would do this. Like, if any woman says that, she is toxic or incredibly naive or just literally slightly narcissistic on that spectrum, probably, where they don't see you as a valuable person. They see you as a means to an end. That is insufferable, that is toxic, and that is heartbreaking. But I will say women who want marriage and who want relationships that are meaningful and depth filled see them as their responsibility. The roles in which you play are different. But for example, and like women run tests on men all the time, and I've talked about this in some of my videos. But men will also run tests on women. One of them being, and you guys know that you do, I hope you know that you do this, and if you don't, start doing this. Men sometimes will create conflict, and justifiable conflict, because they're logical beings, more logical than women tend to be. That doesn't mean women are illogical, but on average. And they will wait to see if she takes responsibility or accountability for that or in her role in whatever it is that he's bringing up. If she does not, then I would say she's not going to be somebody who sees responsibility for when you raise children, for when you have financial issues, for when you go through a hard time. That will be your fault. And so while it might feel trivial that, oh, well, it's fine, she just didn't see it or she didn't understand, but once I explained it to her and I apologized, then she apologized. Like, don't do that. If she is a woman, not a girl, not an entitled female, but a woman that you could build a life with, she will willingly take responsibility. The crux of that, it is your responsibility to not leverage that. Just as much as it is her responsibility not to leverage or weaponize your vulnerability. It is your responsibility not to leverage or weaponize her willingness to take responsibility and apologize for things, right? That's where you have to see personality dimensions in people to know that they will not leverage parts of you where it can become toxic, because the scales shift radically. And on top of that, like, I promise you, those women do exist, but you have to know where your red lines are. Because if you wait on dating the potential that you see in somebody, you will be disappointed. People don't change until they want to change. And thinking, if I can just fix this about this person, then we'll be good. If I can just get them to see this about themselves, then we'll be good. If I can just help them get to this point in their life, then we'll be good. Don't do that. Don't do that, because now you've made a contract that is contingent on your happiness with this person, dependent on that outcome happening. And because you're working with a person and you are not the person that gets to decide how somebody else behaves, you will be pounding your head against a wall, waiting for this person to see the world in reality the way that you do. And so that's what I would say around women. I think that many of them are allergic to responsibility, avoid accountability, and are incredibly entitled. I think some of this is driven by kind of like a flower, right? If you have a flower in a beautiful garden and you don't want the petals to wilt or be harmed by anything, right? They're covered, I guess, like protected societally, familially, relationally. And again, I think some of that is necessary and good. I'm not saying it's negative. But if you do not have somebody who sees that privilege that they have and they take it to weaponize against anything and everything that doesn't come out the way that they wanted it to, or they didn't get their way in a certain situation, or they get to justify everything they've ever done because it's somehow your fault, that's toxic behavior. And I would not entertain women who portray that.
I think a great litmus test is to set a boundary or say no and see how they react. A lot of women don't do well with the word no, and they don't do well with boundaries, and they will try to death by paper cut you into dissolving a boundary. And so that is a very good litmus test to see how things are going to pan out long term, because if there's always some kind of emotionally reactive response to a very understandable or reasonable boundary on either side, by the way, but I just lived experiences, you hear a lot about women setting boundaries with men, but we don't hear a lot about the boundaries that need to be set with women. And there sometimes is a dynamic. Women get a pass for being super emotionally reactive and raising their voice and doing this. And it's like they get a pass because women are more emotional, quote unquote, or
Well,
what
women
have
are
you.
more neurotic on average.
Sure. Yeah. So like, but, and that doesn't justify disrespect, right? Or
No.
emotional abuse, verbal abuse. Don't get a pass just because of, being a woman. Now, again, a good litmus test early on is if there's a boundary crossed, set a boundary and just watch the reaction. If there's a huge amount of emotional reactivity, or they try to, again, dissolve that boundary over time, death by paper cut style, that's not a good sign long term. Both of you need to be able to set boundaries. Boundaries are healthy in relationships, but that's, in my experience, that's a good litmus test.
Yeah. So those are all the questions that I had for today. I
Cool.
hope you guys found this helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for watching. And as far as Kait's audience goes, we love you. Keep giving her the feedback and the comments and keep it classy. You know, y'all are lucky I don't read them, but I'd lose my fucking mind on some of y'all. But keep them coming. It's been really interesting. I've enjoyed it. Kait enjoys it. It's been really cool to give men a voice and hear what you have to say. So thanks for watching. More to come.
Good job.
Good chow indeed.
If you like this, stick around. And if not, respectfully, fuck off.